Welcome to the Around the Table podcast. This podcast is all about the ministry and preaching of Lebanon Baptist Church in Greensboro, North Carolina. Hosted by the pastors of Lebanon Baptist Church. The goal is to help you grow in your faith and spiritual walk with the Lord every single day of your life. To learn more about Lebanon Baptist Church, visit lbcnow.org. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started.
All right, well, welcome back to the Around the Table podcast episode. What episode is it?
This is episode 5 of season 3 of the Around the Table podcast. The podcast people at Lebanon just can't get enough of.
Oh, absolutely.
Lebanon Baptist Church, that is.
Yeah. Yes. Well, my name is Steve Wagner. I'm the operations manager here at Lebanon Baptist Church. And, of course, this week we're joined by our lead pastor, Matt Smith. And today we're going to be talking about Daniel, of course, specifically chapter 3, as we continue in our Truth Wins series here at Lebanon. And we're discussing, of course, Nebuchadnezzar's golden image and the expectation that everyone was to bow to that golden image. We're talking about, specifically in this case, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so that's what we talked about on Sunday. And, we have some questions. So, but before we get into that, is there anything that you think we really need to focus on, things that, you think are just the ultimate questions that we need to answer today?
Yeah, well, I don't know about questions. We've got some good questions that we're going to deal with, but I do want to just add that this past Sunday happened to be Graduate Sunday, and I said this at the beginning, but I could not think of any better passage in the entire Bible to be preaching from right now during this cultural moment for our graduates for a Graduate Sunday than Daniel chapter 3.
Yeah.
And, I would love to say this was because of careful strategic planning and scripting and mapping and years and months of preparation to make it all line up. But I think it was just the providence of God that worked all of that out. I mean, I had planned to be, in my mind, I thought we would be, well past Daniel 3 by now because we're, a few weeks into this series. And,
right.
It just, the introductory stuff took a little bit longer than I had anticipated. But all of that, I think, was God working it out because it's a perfect message for our cultural moment, especially for graduates and for young people and people going into college or people going into the workforce and just understanding the cultural moment that we're in and how we are being told, not exactly like Nebuchadnezzar did, but we're being told to bow to
right.
things that we as Christians are going, I don't think I can bow to this. I don't think this is right for me to bow to this. And so, again, it's very different. Nebuchadnezzar sets up this giant statue, 9 feet wide by 90 feet tall, made of gold, and he says, bow to this and worship it when the music plays. And if you don't, you're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, we're not going to bow. We can't worship an idol. And so they don't bow, and they're thrown into the fiery furnace. But truth wins in this case, and God literally goes into the fire with them. We believe through the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, goes into the fire with them and protects them. They're not burned, they're not harmed, they're not hurt. Those that threw them into the fire died because of getting so close. And yet, at the end, the beautiful thing is Nebuchadnezzar confesses there's no God like their God. No God is able to do the things that their God did. And I love I'll just say before we get in, just for anybody that wasn't here for the sermon, and didn't hear that, not familiar with Daniel chapter 3, and the most important part, I think, is in the middle of the chapter in verses 16, 17, and 18, where basically they are called up by Nebuchadnezzar, and he tells them, I'm going to give you a second chance.
Right.
And they just say, we don't need a second chance. We can't bow. They said, if this is the case, if you're going to throw us into the fire because of this, our God is able. Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. But if not, be it known that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up. They were fully prepared to die for this. They believed their God was able to and would save them from this.
Right.
But they were fully prepared to perish in the fires rather than bowing to the image. And so, yeah, I mean, I just think looking at some of that and getting the context is helpful as we jump in.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too. You know and you talked about it on Sunday, is that these students are now going off into these educations of higher learning, for better or for worse. And they're
higher learning,
air quotes for those of you who are not watching this on video.
Yeah, you got to remember some people are just listening to this.
Right.
So when we do, that's a good point.
Yeah, you have to say it.
We just put higher in air quotes.
Right. You know, because that's what we are facing in today's society. This is often, you know, when we go to the colleges and universities that we have today in this country, that's often what you're looking at is this pressure. And you're oftentimes, as a Christian, as a young Christian, away from your home church, away from your family, where you really have to be able to stand on your own.
Yeah, I think Vodi Bakum said something. Somebody just reminded me of this Wednesday night, that Vodi Bakum said something to the effect of, you know, if we send our kids off to be educated by Caesar and they come back acting like Romans, why are we surprised?
Right.
And I just think we have to be careful, because in a lot of these universities today, they're getting indoctrinated with much more than just what they're going to study for. Right. And in fact, they're coming away with a totally different worldview, you know, and you're like, it's just like, we've got to be aware of what's happening there.
And that same social structure is now being pushed even lower down into your high schools, even your elementary education.
Yep.
But but let's dive into the questions here. So, what are some things in today's society that you might equate with Nebuchadnezzar's golden image?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, like, we don't have an image being set up, in Washington D.C., and we're not being told, hey, yet we're not being told to come to Washington D.C. and bow down and physically worship something, but we are, we are being told to bow, metaphorically speaking. You know, when the White House lights itself up with rainbow-colored lights, we're being, and then post that on their social media. Mm-hmm. You know, we're being asked literally to click like.
Yeah,
we're being asked to applaud
and affirm.
Yeah, and affirm and to bow in that way. I think more so today, it's that we're being asked to applaud, and that's our way. That's the culture's way of getting us to bow, is to affirm something and to go along with it. So I think the biggest issues that we're being asked to bow to today would be same-sex marriage. That shift has happened strongly in the last 20 years, but even specifically, a big shift happened from 2013 to 2018. Same-sex marriage, transgenderism.
Right.
You know, that's a big one today. Title IX, the White House administration just a couple of weeks ago announced that Title IX was going to now include protections for gender identity.
Right.
So whatever gender you identify with, you're now to be treated as a protected class under Title IX. And so, you know, that's clearly something that we're being asked to bow to.
Right.
Abortion is another one. It's the language of it is pro-choice. You know, women have a right to choose. Women have a right to choose. But it's really just abortion. Like, we need to just be able to call it what it is, and affirm, acknowledge what that is. But we're being asked to concede to that, to bow to that. Another one that's been growing for some time in our culture, probably prior to all of these. This one probably goes back a little further, but it's still there. But it's just the idea of equal roles for women and men in the home and in the church.
Yeah.
And I think that's been one that the feminist movement of a couple generations or a generation ago pushed that. And so that moves away from a biblical model that men and women are equal in dignity and worth. We believe that. Men and women are created equal. God created man and woman. We're created equal, yet we're given different roles in the home and in the church.
Right.
Men are called to lead And the women are called to a supportive, submissive relationship in that, and to exercise gifts and to just play a different role. That doesn't mean any one is better than the other.
Right.
But that's an issue that we're being, like, the Methodist Church, we talked about that some on the podcast, but the Methodist Church bowed to that issue a long time ago.
Yeah.
And they're kind of reaping the fruits of that today. So I just think that's an issue that we have to consider, that we're being asked to bow to. And I think probably the most comprehensive idea, here would be, just the concept of truth is not an absolute.
Right.
It's not an absolute. I can't get my throat clear today, but absolute truth is no longer a reality.
Right.
And so we're being told to bow to the fact that truth is an intersubjective experience.
Yeah.
It's not something on the outside that everyone's to conform to. It's something on the inside everyone else is to affirm that person is acknowledging their truth. I mean, think about this. How do we come to a place where we are mass in society? We are applauding someone like Dylan Mulvaney, who, as a 24, 25-year-old biological man, transitions to being and this is air quotes again, to being a woman.
Yeah.
Air quotes woman. And someone like Drew Barrymore gets on her knees on her show and crawls over and literally bows.
Yeah.
And says, applauds and says how brave he is for doing this and for being true to himself. And I'm going, how is a person who is biologically a male wants to transition to being a female being true to themselves? How are we at a place where that's being true to themselves?
Yeah.
I would say that's the opposite of being true to yourself.
Absolutely.
But that's where we are today. And I think that's probably the biggest issue, is that we are being asked to bow to what truth is. Truth is an inner subjective experience today. And whatever you say is true for you is true. And I can't say anything against that. In fact, if I don't say how great that is, then if I don't applaud that, I'm the one that's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so those are, I think, some of the big issues.
Yeah. And that's, something that, you and I are both avid listeners of the briefing, that, Al Mohler talks about a lot, is that there has to be this order in society. There has to be a truth. If not, we have no direction, we have no grounding, we have no basis, and that's the world that we're living in.
Yeah, that intersubjective truth thing doesn't work very well when it comes to like construction and tape measures. And,
right, yeah.
Well, we're going to set this one 12 inches apart, that one 15, but we'll call it 12. I mean,
yeah.
When it comes down to it, there is such a thing as absolute truth, and if you don't live by that, you're going to be in trouble. I think, I would just add on these lines, I think it's so important that Christians have a biblical worldview. But here's the key. You can't have a biblical worldview if you don't know the Bible.
Yeah.
So a little plug for read your Bibles.
Yes. Read your Bibles.
I said that. You heard it here.
Yes.
Read the Bible. Having a biblical worldview is impossible if you don't know the Bible.
Right. And, and one of the things that you talked about on Sunday that, again, not to obsessively plug it, but Al Mohler talked about this morning on the briefing, is this, in America, this legislation of sin. And this morning he even talked about how, the courts have been brought into this because, and we go back to the 70s, we look at Roe v. Wade, where some of the liberals saw that they couldn't really get what they needed done through legislation, and so they went to the courts, and that's we ruled legislation through the courts that, of course, now has been overturned. But and even to his to his credit, admitted that conservatives have done the same thing. But, we're seeing a lot of this legislation that defies biblical truths. We're seeing, you just spoke about Title IX, which isn't legislation, but a executive order, but it's happening. And in his letter to the Christians in Rome, Paul says this: "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist," so the governments that exist, "have been instituted by God." So how can we reconcile Paul's statement with what we're seeing today in our country?
That is a loaded question.
Yes, it is.
But very good question. I think I think this too. I want to interject this. I think that one of the things I talked about too in the message Sunday was just the tactics of the culture, and how they seek to get us to bow through language confusion, things like that, mockery, and intimidation or threats. But I think one of the ways too is the church. Okay, two things we've been told. We've been told that the church is not supposed to get involved in politics, and we've been told that all these issues we're talking about now are issues of politics. So when everything is politicized, right, and then the church is told you can't speak into politics, and people start getting fearful of saying anything because they're like, I'm not supposed to talk about politics as a Christian. I'm supposed to separate my Christianity from politics. Like, you can't do that. Everything, these are moral issues, and the church has to speak into this. The whole concept of separation of church and state was not for the purpose of keeping the church from speaking into the issues of the state. It was from keeping the state from dictating what the church was to do. That's the whole purpose behind that.
And you have to also think about, when this whole concept of separation of church and state came about in the colonies, the church was the state. The church was the courts. The purpose of separation of church and state doesn't mean that the church shouldn't have anything to do with politics and government, but that it should not be the final authority in that.
Right.
There has to be that separation.
But we've bought that lie for a generation or two.
Yeah. And
now we have been silenced by that. We've been told we can't speak on those issues, and we haven't, and the church hasn't. And so I think we've got to acknowledge that we've got to be outspoken about some of these things. The other thing I think is, all right, so how do we reconcile Paul's statement to be subject to the governing authorities with the things that we're seeing happen today? So the first thing I would say is what we're seeing happen today in America from our government and our state pales in comparison to what was happening in Rome, to whom the Christians, Paul was writing that to.
Right.
Okay, so what we're seeing happen today with our state, there's a lot of evil things. Okay, abortion, murder, affirming LGBTQ, all of that stuff. That's horrible, but it's not at the level quite yet. Now, I think it's headed in that direction, but it's not the level that it was in Rome. I mean, in Rome, you had... and this is a little warning for those of you that may be listening with kids. You may want to turn it off at this point. But when, or at least come back to this later, or tell them to, do something else for a second. Anyway, there was an emperor for Rome who literally, when Paul was writing that, the Roman emperor had, a young boy as his passive partner in a homosexual relationship that he would literally tie up and would parade out in public.
Yeah.
This was can you imagine? And this is the leader that Paul is saying, he's the emperor.
Yeah.
And Paul is saying to those Christians, be subject to the governing authorities because God put them there. What? How is that possible? How do we reconcile that? And so I think one way we reconcile that is we realize we're not in the same exact context that those Christians were in the sense that they couldn't vote. They couldn't speak out against some of these things without dying. And so I think we have to consider that. Jesus said, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." We have two responsibilities as Christians. We have a responsibility to the state. We have a responsibility to God. Now, in an ideal context, we can fulfill both of those responsibilities. We can be faithful to God, loyal to God, and loyal to the state. But for the last 2,000 years of, nearly 2,000 years of church history, much of church history has been about instances where Christians could not fulfill their responsibility to the state. The state was so evil, they had to speak out against it. The state was so evil, they could not go along with it. Yeah. And so I think if the state is, again, the state is asking us to do things that violate biblical truth, that's where we can't do it.
Right.
You know, if the state is saying to us as a church, you have to perform same-sex weddings, and we're saying, man, that we cannot do that. You're going to lose this. Well, we're going to have to lose that. You're going to lose your tax-exempt status. We're going to have to lose that. You know, there is a line that you have to draw with that. And that's where I just think, you know, we have to take those things in tension.
Yeah. And obviously, you know, that's what this story, you know, displays to us. And, you know, one of the things that you talked about on Sunday was, you know, we have to learn to stand alone. You know, that's just going to be, for the foreseeable future, the reality. And we saw a really good example of this, you know, just a couple of weeks ago in NFL kicker Harrison Butker's commencement speech.
All right, hold on just a second. Let me interject here.
Oh, boy.
So you, a Buffalo Bills fan, you're about to speak positively about a kicker.
Well,
is that right?
That is
you
right.
haven't had a good experience with kickers, have you?
We have not. We have not. You know, and this last season, you know, brought up some fresh wounds.
Fresh wounds.
You know, wide right. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's.
Sorry, I got you way off.
That's all right. That's all right.
Got you way off track.
You can't.
You're hurt now.
I am.
That was offensive. Did I offend you?
You offended me. But I have to stand alone. But anyways, so, you know, he gave this commencement speech. Harrison Butker, you know, 3-time Super Bowl winning kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, right? And he gives this commencement speech at Benedictine College in Kansas, which is a Catholic institution. And obviously his views are Catholic. He is a Catholic. And so it's nothing groundbreaking for a Catholic to espouse Catholic views in a speech at a Catholic university. Well, that's for another episode.
Yeah,
of the podcast.
You know, we'll talk about the Pope at some point.
Right.
If let me just interject. But if you missed the 60 Minutes with the Pope, I mean, we would say, judging from Harrison Butker's speech, he's more Catholic than the Pope.
Right. Yeah.
It is actually shocking. It is actually shocking in a way for a
It is.
But it shouldn't be. That's the point. It
Right.
shouldn't
be
shocking for a Catholic, a practicing Catholic, speaking at a Catholic school to share remarks and to make statements in line with Catholic doctrine. That shouldn't be shocking, should it?
No, it shouldn't. But that brings up a good point too. Is, you know, we're talking about Christians in the context of greater society having to stand alone, but increasingly we're seeing Christians have to stand alone in the Christian community as well.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, when you're standing alone today, you would expect to have to stand alone in a public secular workplace, but you wouldn't expect to have to stand alone among other Christians. But they're back. You know, that is a real reality. And I mean, even in you got to think there are thousands of Jewish people there, we believe, when Nebuchadnezzar says to bow. And yet, we get 3 mentioned who don't bow.
Right. Yeah.
Where are we at now?
We're talking about the NFL kicker.
Oh yeah, Harrison Butker. Oh yeah, so the speech.
How in our everyday lives, you know, how can we stand alone as evangelical Christians?
Yeah, how can we stand? Well, I just think I think we have to speak truth. We have to speak the truth. You know. And you know, the other thing is when Butker made these remarks and a short, this is the thing too, a short clip of what he said, primarily about women and about the lie that many of the college girls.
But that's a small part of this speech.
Yeah, when you look at his speech, we've got his entire speech here. Yeah. He made a 2-minute remark about girls being told they're in college. He said, "You have been told one of the greatest lies, that your worth and dignity and value is going to be found in your career." And he just goes on to, tell the example of his own wife, but also to just say that that's a lie of the culture. That he said, "I would venture to guess that most of you are more excited about," and I'm paraphrasing, but you're more excited about having children, getting married, and raising a family than you are about your careers. Now, many women I've seen have commented and said, who are career women, and Butker's own mom is a career-minded mother.
Yep.
He's not saying don't have a career. He's just saying you've been told to put all of your value and identity in that career.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really resonate with what is true. And so many women, I've seen several women who have come out and said, that what he said is true. Like, I work hard, but I'm more excited about my family and my kids. I mean, I'm more alive when it comes to that than anything else. And so that little thing is what went viral, that part.
Yep.
But he says a lot of other things in here. He has some very hard remarks, I think, that are directed towards those that profess to be Catholic but don't live. They don't live according to Catholic doctrine and teaching. None of that really went viral. It's just that one issue. And again, that shows you, that goes back to some of the points we talked about in the first question. What are the areas we're being told to bow to today? Some of these other things he spoke to, we're not being asked to bow on those issues.
Right.
It just goes to the forefront of some of the actual things. And I think, so I want to add this too. And you can talk about this because I know you know a little bit more about it, but with this guy. So this is what happens, right? He gets criticized from the left. His speech, a little part of it goes viral. He gets a lot of criticism. Some are calling for him to lose his job over it. Okay, here literally, this is the tactics, the threats, the negative press, all of that. But what's happening with his jersey sales?
Yeah, I mean, through the roof. Right? I mean,
why,
it's the top-selling jersey in the NFL.
And why is that?
Clearly, there's folks out there that agree with the truth that he's speaking, but we don't hear from them.
No, and see what happens is truth resonates with so many people,
right?
And then you're seeing those jerseys go up. I mean, it's money talks.
Yeah,
in a capitalist, which we still are sort of in a capitalist society, money speaks and people show their support through things like this. Why is Target backing off of some of their pride displays and scaling back this year to only half of their stores are going to have the big giant displays? Because they're realizing wow, we were not on the side of truth with that. Now they're still standing behind their support of the LGBTQ community. But again, truth wins. And when you speak the truth, you may be criticized for it, but you'll see, in this case, it's resonating with a massive amount of people.
Yeah.
And I would just encourage you to, let me just say this to those watching or listening. If you've seen the little posts and the little meme about in a world of Travis Kelce's, be a Harrison Butker and who stands for values, oh yeah, that's a cool kind of catchy. Everybody gets on board with that.
Yeah.
Kelsey's drinking a beer in front of students, telling them to go live their life, having fun and partying, and he's applauded by that.
Yeah.
There's obviously a difference there, but I would say go read all of Butker's speech. You can find on the internet, read the whole thing. There's things in there that we would not agree with in terms of some of the Catholic doctrine. There is clearly a little undertone of salvation by works that comes out in there. So there's some issue with it, but what he said about women...
But that's a Catholic thing.
That's a Catholic thing. That's what you would expect. But, some of the things that he said there about male-female roles, we would agree with, and that aligns with biblical truth.
Yeah.
So I would just say read the whole thing.
Yeah, and before, and obviously we don't want to focus too much on that, but, clearly Harrison Butker feared God more than the fire, right? And we hear that a lot, and that's one thing that you talk about. But, the fear that we're talking about, we're not talking about fear as in frightening, right? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, so we're going to talk about what that fear means. That was one of the points Sunday. We need to fear God more than the fire. And I mean, Butker even mentions in the very opening remarks of his speech, that is a good example, but he even mentions in the opening remarks that he had just given a commencement address at the school he graduated from last year, which is Georgia Tech. And he felt like one graduation speech was more than enough, but he was kind of persuaded to do it. He knew... Like Butker knew he was going to, if he was honest, if he spoke the truth, okay, that he was going to come under fire for that, and yet he did it. He came to a point where he felt like going and speaking the truth and sharing this was more important than being silent and protecting himself. So, when we talk about fearing God. We're told to fear God in the Scripture. Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, okay? And there is a sense in which fearing God includes a reverence for Him, like a healthy, reverential respect for God. When Isaiah saw God high and lifted up, he fell. Anytime someone came in the presence of God or even an angel, they fall down immediately. And they are struck by reverence, by how small they really are, and they see God for how great He really is. Isaiah says, "Woe is me! I'm a man of unclean lips." When he sees God, he's like, I'm not even worthy of speaking on behalf of God. So, we've got to have a healthy view of God and His greatness and His might and His majesty and His power, and we have to have a fear of Him more than a fear of what man can do to us. A lot of times Christians want to, and teachers and preachers and pastors, they want to say that fear of God is only just respect for Him. But I think there is more to it than that. I think there is really an actual fear of God's power to judge and punish sin.
Right.
And it's like, I'm going to be judged by an almighty, holy, righteous God who hates sin. And if I participate in that, that is going to bring about judgment. Now, for us as Christians, we understand it. Our sin brought about judgment on Christ. Like, Christ was judged because of our sin, and that ought to break our heart for it. But I think that when it comes to this, we've just got to say, hey, I'm going to stand and answer to God one day for how I conducted myself and what I participated in, what I clapped for and applauded, what I spoke out against and what I refused to speak out against. Times where I kept silent. I think we think as Christians too, like, we may only, we think, well, God will judge me for the sin that I committed. And we don't think about the times where we keep silent when we know we need to speak out.
Right, yeah.
And I just think, that's what is involved in fearing God. There is something to it, reverence, respect, recognizing Him for His all power and majesty, but also just like having a fear, like I'm gonna have to give an account to Him for this one day.
Yeah, and and just to wrap up, one of the things that you talked about on Sunday, one of the fires that we face in today's world, one of those things is language confusion. We talked about that, and that's a difficult subject because as Christians, we do want to love our neighbor, but we also want to be able to speak the truth and stick to the truth. So how can we stand for the truth while still exhibiting that love to our neighbors?
Yeah, I think so. The hard thing, I cited the article from Stanford University about how they were trying to eliminate harmful language from their IT at Stanford, and they had a long list of words and
some legitimate,
and phrases. Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. There are some phrases and there are some words that are legitimately, really, actually offensive to people. And so the difficulty is when you put some of those in and then a whole bunch of other words that are really you're just trying to push some kind of an agenda to move the needle further left. That's hard. We have to be discerning. That's where we as Christians have to discern We don't want to be thoughtless. We don't want to be careless in the things that we say and the words that we use. We want to show respect and love in doing that and how we speak to people. But I think the difficulty when it comes to some of these issues are that our culture has made it synonymous with the person's identity.
Right.
So if a person says, for example, if a biological man who has transitioned to being a woman,
air quotes,
woman, if they say, I want to be referred to she, her feminine pronouns, for you not to do that, our culture has said, you're hating that person. That's hate speech. That's Yeah,
in some instances they've tried to make it a crime.
They've tried to make it a crime. And so the message of the culture is that by not using their preferred pronoun, even though preferred is fallen out of graces as well, it's just pronoun now. But if you don't use their pronoun that they want you to use, then you're denying their very existence. You're basically denying their dignity as a human being. And I think we've got to say, listen, I'm not doing that. We've got to be open with them and say, listen, I can't use that pronoun because I believe that to do that is literally participating in a lie. And I really think that one day, you'll look back one day and you would be angry at me for going along with this. I really think one day when you come to the truth and you come to understand that, you'll look back and you'll think, why were they not honest with me? Why were they like in the kids' book, The Emperor's New Clothes? Why were they all going along with this?
Yeah.
I look like a fool now because I've lived my whole life this way, and you went along with it. And that's where I just think the loving thing to do is to just have the honest conversation with them. You can't have that with everybody. I mean, some people you just don't have that close of a relationship with. It may be a colleague at work, and in that case, I think you've got to try to figure out how you can associate without participating in.
Right.
And that's where you may, with a colleague at work, you just use their name. Their legal name is, changed. You use their legal name, but you just avoid using the pronouns.
Yeah.
And then if you get close enough to that person, you care about them. I mean, I think you got to love and care about them. Just because they are trying to push that agenda in the workplace, doesn't mean that, well, you're going out to pick up lunch and you ask the two people in the cubicle next to them if you can get something for them. Well, ask that one as well. Ask that coworker as well. Because
that might be your opening.
That might be your opening. You want to try to treat them equally with equal dignity, love, and respect. I think the issue is just don't treat them differently just because they are living a lie.
Right.
Treat them with the same love. I would say maybe even treat them a little extra special with love and care in those ways without participating. In the lie. And I think that's how we can stand for truth while still exhibiting love for our neighbors.
Well, we are running over, and true to form, at least in terms of
Was that supposed to be a joke?
No, that's just fact. That's just fact.
We set a time limit, and we go over it. Anytime I'm involved, it's going to go over.
Yeah, but that's okay.
It is okay. I mean, this is tough stuff, and there's a lot more that we could get into with these things, but I hope that those listening and or watching will read the Scripture, spend more time in the Word, or at least equal time in the Word from what you're seeing with consuming everything else. Get your worldview from Scripture, but be wise and discerning. I mean, these are difficult days that we're living in.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Pastor Matt, for joining us this week. We look forward to having you here with us next week as we continue on in our Truth Wins series and study the book of Daniel.